Michael Wolff book Siege, from oral sex with a top diplomat to Trump not knowing how to use stairs. Try independent minds free for 1 month. He can't handle numbers, they have no meaning to him. The newest book from author, Siege, has been released, and it does not disappoint in its effort to shock with its titillating bits of palace intrigue and gossip from within you, or perhaps, this time, from just outside you, the Trump White House. Mr. Wolff's follow-up to his best-selling book on S presidency, Fire and Fury, purportedly includes an inside look at the president's behavior as the investigation by special counsel embroiled the administration in an ongoing scandal. But, while that investigation threatened the presidency, the book includes other interesting details about the way in which those around the president seemed to view Mr. Trump, his treatment of a top member of his administration, and the extraordinary power that his son-in-law appears to have gleaned as a White House aide. The Independent read through the book on its release day, and rounded up the most interesting takeaways from our reading. It's worth noting that one of the most outrageous claims in the book is that the president once bragged he received oral sex from the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Ms. Haley is described in the book as a highly ambitious and skilled politician, who first wanted to be named Secretary of State, but was tapped to be the ambassador of the United Nations instead. Mr. Trump, according to Mr. Wolff, has a rare respect for Ms. Haley. But, he never. Note a similar allegation was raised in Mr. Wolff's previous book, and Ms. Haley called the suggestion she was having an affair with Mr. Trump highly. Melania Trump apparently thinks the president does not know how to act with children, while others who know him have described him as a man with the mind of a 12-year-old. This came in response to the strange fireside chat in which the president called up a 7-year-old boy, and asked him if he still believed in Santa Claus. The First Lady was, apparently, Ms. Trump was not exactly pleased. Soon after, it wasn't an act of self-constraint that the First Lady was willing to entertain, though, and here's how Mr. Wolff explains it. Melania certainly had no intention of staying behind. Among other issues, in another portion of the book that illustrates Mr. Trump's potential lack of experience with children, the guy who used to mic Mr. Trump up while he was on The Apprentice recalled a time when Mr. Trump lashed out at his adult son Donald Trump Jr. for having too many G kids. That sound engineer, Eric Whitestone, claimed of Mr. Trump he's a 12-year-old in a man's body, all he does is take downs of people based on their physical appearance, you short, fat, bald, whatever it is. Mr. Whitestone also told Mr. Wolff that apparently Mr. Trump couldn't be around black people, and that he couldn't handle steps. Recounting the days on The Apprentice, Mr. Whitestone said Mr. Trump apparently once locked himself in his trailer during filming because he didn't want to be touched by a black person who was filling in as the guy who puts a microphone on his lapel. Mr. Whitestone was told after that alleged incident to always be there to help Mr. Trump. He helped with spot. Mr. Whitestone told Mr. Wolff that his time with the future president would get him used to some odd idiosyncrasies. He can't walk down steps, can't walk down hills. He's got mental. For those keeping track, Mr. Trump did ride an escalator down into the lobby of Trump Tower to announce his bid for the presidency in 2015, but has since then been seen regularly using stairs with apparent ease. Mr. Wolff says the president wants people to think he had an affair with a young assistant in the White House. According to the book, one of the reasons Mr. Trump later gave to his friends for staying behind at the White House this past holiday season was because he was banging a young White House aide. It wouldn't be the first time that a president slept with a White House staffer, of course, but Mr. Wolff doesn't seem convinced. Shutdown bravado? Locker room talk? Everyone apparently thinks Mr. Trump is crazy, or perhaps just annoying. Various characters in Mr. Trump's orbit have at one time or another have mocked the president behind his back, or just expressed a deep concern with the way he has led the United States, according to Mr. Wolff's book. Among those named in the book are Ms. Haley, as well as former U.S. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, former U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis, former counselor to the President Dina Powell, and even Mr. Trump's former Chief of Staff, John Kelly. Some, like Mr. Trump's former Chief Economic Advisor, Gary Cohn, even mocked the president in front of others. Gary Cohn, for instance, would take Trump's calls while playing golf at the private Seabonac Golf Club in Southampton, holding out the phone so others could hear Trump's diatribes and meanwhile making crazy man gestures, Mr. Wolff writes. Rupert Murdoch, likewise, couldn't always handle Mr. Trump. I can't get the asshole off the phone, Mr. Wolff quotes the media giant as saying, noting that he was holding out the phone as the president's voice rambled off into the air. Jared Kushner has carved out considerable power in the White House. Of the weightier allegations in Mr. Wolff's new book are the sections involving Mr. Kushner, who is the president's son-in-law. Mr. Kushner, a real estate developer known for potentially shaky loans he took out to build a skyscraper in Manhattan, was reportedly viewed as a weak link in the Trump administration, but took advantage of the access he has to upend U.S. foreign policy. The book says that Mr. Kushner was obsessed with Henry Kissinger, the former U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor for Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. The two reportedly sparked up a friendship, and Mr. Kushner would regularly name-drop Mr. Kissinger. And, just while Mr. Kushner's wife Ivanka Trump did not appear to approve of that relationship, she referred to Mr. Kissinger as Jared's Uncle Henry. The book paints a portrait of a surprisingly effective effort by Mr. Kushner to be relevant in the Trump White House. Mr. Wolff writes that Mr. Kushner eventually established himself as the most efficient point of contact for foreign governments looking to influence the U.S. president, a role that upended decades of U.S. tradition to reliably frustrate transactional and freelance diplomatic efforts. That benefited countries that realized Mr. Kushner's influence like China, and interests in the Middle East, but hurt countries that did not focus on him in their diplomatic efforts, like Europe, Canada, and Britain, according to the book. Mr. Kushner, the book says, essentially turned U.S. foreign policy into an investment banking scheme. For Saudi Arabian Prince Mohammed bin Salman MBs, the relationship with Mr. Kushner may have been especially helpful. According to the book, this guy was the link between certain factions in the royal family and Osama bin Laden. We know that. A spokesman for Mr. Kushner, when contacted by The Independent for a comment, referred to a previous statement from White House Deputy Assistant to the President Avi Berkowitz-Michael. Only the best news in your inbox. Only the best news in your inbox. Register with your social account or to log in. You can find our community guidelines in full. Create a commenting name to join the debate. Create a commenting name to join the debate. Create a commenting name to join the debate. You can find our community guidelines in full. Create a commenting name to join the debate. Create a commenting name to join the debate. Create a commenting name to join the debate. Enter your email to follow new comments on this article. Are you sure you want to submit this vote? Are you sure you want to mark this comment as inappropriate? Are you sure you want to mark this comment as inappropriate? Are you sure you want to delete this comment? Create a commenting name to join the debate. Want to bookmark your favorite articles and stories to read or reference later? Try Independent. Find your bookmarks in your section, under my profile.
Raindrop, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.